As mentioned off the top of part 1, Ring of Honor has always needed a strong identity if it was going to thrive. During its early years, Ring of Honor's identity was tied to great wrestling and great wrestlers, but as time went on, other factors began to shroud the audience's perception of the company, despite those involved still delivering great wrestling. As we continue our drive down ROH memory lane, we must buckle in as things are about to start getting a little bit bumpy. If we simply pick up where we left off in part 1, Ring of Honor marched into the 2010s with many of their most iconic stars having left the company, but plenty of fresh faces stepping in to replenish the shelves. The likes of Samoa Joe, Bryan Danielson, and CM Punk were long gone, but instead the ROH roster was populated with wrestlers who would play a big role in defining the industry in the decade to come. Stars like Tyler Black, Kevin Steen, El Generico, Davey Richards, and Eddie Edwards stepped up, carrying the main event scene with great matches and rivalries. And while they were on top, you had young, prospering stars like future Shock the System buddies Adam Cole and Kyle O'Reilly working their way up the card. A roster like this should have no trouble carrying on from those who came before them, and to their credit, they didn't. Their work was tremendous, but it was what was happening out of the ring that shaped the identity of Ring of Honor during this time. I'm Tempest, hailing from partsFUNknown, and this is the Rise, Fall, and Rise Again of Ring of Honor Part 2, The First Fall. There are a number of dominoes that fell in sequential order during the late 2000s and early 2010s, but you can trace them back to domino numero uno, that being the decision to part ways with Booker Gabe Sapolsky on October 26, 2008. This was one of the first major changes in ROH's creative direction, and it led to WWE not general manager Adam Pearce holding the position until August 15, 2010, when he was replaced by Delirious. How anyone was able to make it past the language barrier with Delirious is beyond me, but it does make his run as Booker that much more impressive. However, more than just the creative direction of the company was changing. As we mentioned last time, Ring of Honor needed to make money. Newsflash, I know. But in January of 2009, ROH signed a 2-year contract to air a weekly wrestling show on HDNet. This change was also accompanied by the arrival of Jim Cornette as executive producer. Cornette has maintained that Delirious remained the head booker during his tenure, but it was hard not to see Cornette's influence on the show. It's not as if all of Cornette's input was bad, but he no longer had his finger on the pulse of pro wrestling by the time he joined Ring of Honor. Whether you agree with his taste in wrestling or not is irrelevant when you consider that those Cornette clashed with were stars like Kevin Steen and the Young Bucks, all of whom have undoubtedly connected with large audiences and achieved great success in wrestling. When it was his job to capitalize on the star power of these guys, well, he didn't quite do that, and it was part of the cause for the downturn in support Ring of Honor received around this time. No one cause led to fans turning off the product, but it was a combination of boring booking, these creative differences, and, well, technical issues. Loads and loads of technical issues. On May 21st, 2011, Kerry Silkin sold Ring of Honor to the Sinclair Broadcasting Group, marking the true end of an era for the promotion and leaving ROH in much less sturdy hands. Jim Cornette and Gary Jester worked out the deal with Joe Koff, who would become the new COO of Ring of Honor. The idea at the time was the extra exposure from Sinclair Broadcasting would allow ROH to tour their new markets and attract around 750 fans. At one point in time that may have worked, but wrestling simply wasn't popular enough at the time to support this model. Fans were uncertain about the future of Ring of Honor from the top on downwards, but few things brought them as much frustration as trying to watch a Ring of Honor pay-per-view in the early 2010s. This again is where I will stress the importance of a positive identity with fans. Independent wrestling is a niche medium, and not many people will want to go out of their way to watch something they can't find with a simple YouTube search, let alone something they have to pay for. So if the perception of your company becomes that you're totally inept when it comes to the subtle but luxurious art of pay-per-view broadcasting, that doesn't give potential new fans much of an incentive to check out your shows. During the early 2010s, Ring of Honor's major shows were rife with production errors, both technical and physical, with pay-per-view feeds going dead and lights going out in buildings with a sense of regularity that was a little too much for Ring of Honor fans to handle. During these years, this was the identity of Ring of Honor to fans, which was very unfortunate given just how much talent was on display. Legendary rivalries were birthed here, like Adam Cole versus Kyle O'Reilly, Kevin Steen versus noted orphanage builder El Generico, and Eddie Edwards versus Davey Richards. Despite all the technical issues, if you committed to watching Ring of Honor during this time, you were still rewarded with a ridiculously hardworking roster made up of many of the best wrestlers in the country at the time. In addition to these fresh faces, names like Roderick Strong and the Briscoes also made ROH a more permanent home, continuing to be featured across multiple eras. This was my first exposure to Ring of Honor. While the promotion may not have had the same aura it once had, ROH was still an alternative to WWE with a much more exciting style of wrestling than what was being presented in either WWE or TNA at the time, although over the next few years the top promotions in North America would start to take notice of this style and integrate it into their own promotions. In the early 2010s, however, you still had John Cena and Randy Orton holding both WWE World titles at the same time, and Sting wrestling Jeff Hardy at Victory Road. If neither of these options piqued your interest, there was Ring of Honor, still a not half bad third option. The TV product was still smaller and more intimate than WWE or TNA, but it had an underground vibe more akin to what Full Sail NXT was going for. Only here it was because of budget constraints and not because WWE wanted to fit in with the cool kids. Again, not flashy and often kinda boring, but building to major shows where the big matches would take place, the Ring of Honor TV could easily be compared to NXT TV, which definitely had its fans despite not being the most exciting show overall. If that was your thing, you had Ring of Honor. The big shows delivered too, when they weren't derailed by technical tomfoolery of course, but fans still got to see matches like Davey Richards vs Michael Elgin at Showdown in the Sun 2012, still considered to be one of the best matches in company history, and one of the best matches ever. You can list however many examples you want of the excellent work that took place in Ring of Honor during the 2010s. Kevin Steen and El Generico had one of the most iconic feuds in Ring of Honor history, with brutal main events at Final Battle 2010 and 2012 before Generico left the company. But that would again start to become the new theme of the promotion. Sooner or later, everyone was leaving. There were very few who stayed with Ring of Honor all the way to the end, and as the 2010s began to roll by, the top stars of ROH were becoming the top stars of WWE and TNA. Being the third biggest promotion in the United States meant that they were going to lose out on many of their homegrown talent when their contracts came up, simply because other companies were willing to open the checkbook just a little bit wider than Sinclair Broadcasting. Years after CM Punk, Samoa Joe, and Bryan Danielson made their way to WWE and TNA, Tyler Black, Kevin Steen, and El Generico became WWE's Seth Rollins, Kevin Owens, and still El Generico because he's off somewhere building orphanages. Meanwhile, I think a guy named Sami Zayn got really inspired and became the spiritual successor to Generico in WWE. Paralleling the success of their WWE counterparts, Eddie Edwards and Davey Richards made their way to Impact, where they would become 5-time tag team champions. There was a bit of a perception of ROH being something of a feeder system for WWE during this time, which WWE seemed to accentuate with the relaunch of NXT in 2012. NXT was WWE's Super Indie, their answer to Ring of Honor, and in those early years the show was carried by a lot of Ring of Honor alumni. Rollins was the first champion, while Cesaro, formerly ROH's Claudio Castagnoli, tore up NXT with Sami Zayn during the early years of the brand. This led to Zayn's rivalry with Kevin Owens, and by 2015, there was a familiar sheen to NXT for ROH fans. Ring of Honor had its competition standing over it, but with the departure of Jim Cornette in late 2012, the promotion started to make the climb out of the bad reputation pit. The production value of ROH began to improve, and while they wouldn't be able to reach the levels of production demonstrated by WWE and TNA, they were able to connect to their audience once again in the same way they always had. During the perfect time, ROH introduced New Japan Pro Wrestling as their new partner, resulting in the two promotions exchanging talent for the rest of the decade. This was a huge boost for Ring of Honor at the time, as New Japan was going through a renaissance, the likes of which wrestling fans in the United States were not at all accustomed to, and now they were able to see the likes of Shinsuke Nakamura take on Kevin Steen, and Kazuchika Okada take on Cedric Alexander in North America, all because of Ring of Honor. One of the keys to ROH's success has been a believable argument that they had the best wrestling product in America at the time. When that was an easy argument to make, odds are Ring of Honor's identity was looking pretty good. When it wasn't, well, then we had the Ring of Honor that we'll get to in part 3. As ROH got some of its mojo back, shows like All-Star Extravaganza, Supercard of Honor, Best in the World, and Final Battle became must-see viewing for hardcore fans. It was still usually a 50-50 shot whether the pay-per-view would actually work, but if you managed to see what was advertised, you were in for a good show. These were the days of Jay Briscoe as world champion, proving a tag team guy can also work as a top singles champion in the modern era, while Adam Cole reached the top of the ROH mountain a record 3 times, and the returning Jay Lethal reigned as world champion for 427 days. There were loads of things to latch onto at the time if you were a Ring of Honor fan, but the promotion's biggest success to date came as a result of one group: well, one subgroup of one group. As ROH forged its way past the halfway point of the decade, a group of foreign talent were redefining what it meant to be cool heels in Japan. Bullet Club exploded in popularity, and by 2015 there was a full integration of Bullet Club into Ring of Honor programming. But saying ROH's success came because of Bullet Club would only be half true, as the real upswing in popularity came more specifically from the Elite. The Elite. The Young Bucks were able to catch lightning in a bottle with their Being the Elite series, allowing a new way for fans to connect with many of Ring of Honor's top stars. The cast and its popularity continued to grow as the years went by, as Adam Cole, Adam Page, Marty Scurll, and Cody Rhodes were all integrated into the Elite. With the Elite as the focal point of their programming, and New Japan by their side supplying some of the best wrestlers in the world for their biggest events, Ring of Honor was starting to make serious moves as 2015 turned into 2016 turned into 2017. While the upswing in business meant that Ring of Honor was capable of dealing out big money contracts, they were still losing many of their top stars to WWE, with NXT now being considered the in promotion. In a very short period of time, ROH lost Adam Cole, Kyle O'Reilly, and Bobby Fish, and had earlier lost Roderick Strong all to WWE. One system can only be shocked like that so many times, so when the Young Bucks stood their ground in ROH, choosing not to sign with WWE, it gave the ROH fans some security that at least for the time being the top stars weren't going anywhere. Well, that's just depressing now, isn't it? With the Elite at the helm, ROH were able to draw 3,500 people for the Young Bucks versus the Hardys at Supercard of Honor 11 in 2017, a pretty good number for the company at the time, before packing 6,000 people into Supercard of Honor 12 a year later to see Cody Rhodes versus Kenny Omega. They had strong competition from NXT as they battled for the hardcore fans' cash, but by 2018, Ring of Honor had surpassed Impact to become the second biggest promotion in the States, and had as much acclaim as anyone that their in-ring product was the best, and their world champion was the best wrestler around. After a shaky start to the decade, Ring of Honor had once again found its identity, and this time they had the support of the fans. Ring of Honor was growing, and they needed to expand their business, something they seemed extremely cautious about doing. So, in response to one little tweet from Dave Meltzer, Cody Rhodes and the Young Bucks set in place a plan to run the biggest independent wrestling show ever, and to do it with Ring of Honor's help. They couldn't have known it then, but ROH running this event is about as ironic as Bret Hart walking Shawn Michaels through how to put him in the sharpshooter.